Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Today we're going to take a look at all the banners in version 5.1 and I'm going to give you guys my opinion as well as a bit of math here and there in terms of which characters I recommend pulling for as well as, in my opinion, their pull value. So starting off, we are currently in the first half banner, which features Xilonen as well as Chiori, and I'm going to quickly talk about the characters as well as the weapons. And for the second half, we know that Nahida as well as Hu Tao will be getting their rerun. So before we get into any type of analysis in terms of investment priority as well as pull value, for any of these characters, the most important thing about this is to always prioritize pulling for a character that you think you will have the most fun with. And with that being said, out of the 4 characters that we can expect to pull for in version 5.1, none of them are so bad that I would recommend against pulling them if they are a character that you just like their design or like their playstyle, etc, etc. Like if it was actually like a bad character that I don't recommend pulling for, like for example, no offense to Albedo, but like Albedo, you know, I would say I don't think he has much pull value. However, out of these 4 characters, if they are one that you really like, you can't really go terribly wrong with pulling any of them. But wait! Actually don't wait, because the wait is almost over for Jujutsu Kaisen fans thanks to today's sponsor, Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade. The first officially licensed JJK mobile game is launching on November 7th and pre-registration is live right now. Dive into the strategic cursed energy battles like never before with an innovative combat system. Leverage elemental weaknesses and counters, and special abilities such as healing and counterattacks and so much more. This game will push your gamer skills with all its unique scenarios. If you love games like Fate Grand Order, you'll feel right at home with faster gameplay and way more action. And you'll be able to team up your favorite JJK characters for cooperative ultimate attacks, unlocking epic animations and unique dialogues. Feel the bond between characters like never before. Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade is also packed with quality of life features such as auto combat, 2x speed up, and sweep functions to accommodate your busy schedule. And to celebrate the launch, join the Phantom Parade early gacha for a chance to win SSR characters, recollection bits, and tons of rewards.
And after pre-registering, unleash 100 million black flashes worldwide to receive 500 cubes upon game launch.
And you can even invite your friends to form your own Phantom Parade team. The more friends you invite, the bigger the rewards, up to 1,100 cubes. Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade is launching November 7th. Smash that link down below to pre-register now and join the fight. Huge thanks to Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's actually start with Xilonen. Xilonen is one of the most meta-defining characters, in my opinion, that we've had in a very long time. I would argue since Kazuha, because Kazuha, if you guys don't know who he is, well, he is a humble samurai who literally has been one of the most used characters and one of the best characters in the entire game ever since his release. So yeah, absolutely bonkers how he is still one of the best characters in the game. Frankly, he was released way back then, but he basically has a modern character's kit as well as power level in him. And Xilonen is finally another character that can actually give him a run for his money, and really it does not hurt anyone's account to have both of them. A really quick overview, Xilonen is able to provide massive buffs to the team by shredding resistances of enemies by 36 to 45% depending on whether or not you have a Constellation 3, as well as to provide a 40% bonus damage buff to Petch elements or crystallizable elements as well as Geo. And finally, of course, she heals as well with her elemental burst while in support mode, and she even provides a free Night Soul burst. And of course, if you have her signature weapon, that will provide an additional 25.6% bonus damage to the entire party. Mine's at Refinement 5, so it's double that. And what's crazy is that Xilonen's own rate, according to this Reddit thread, is at 68% of the current players that have cleared. I believe Abyss 12 is how these statistics work. That is absolutely insane considering she literally just came out and 68% of people have pulled for her. So this is an indicator of just how incredible of a character Xilonen is, which is just slightly less than Neuvillette, who's literally one of the best characters in the game. Now, in terms of Xilonen's investment priority, we can see here that here we have this chart and pull priority. So we have a DPS build for Xilonen in this area, and then we have a Vape Milani's damage to show you guys roughly how much she will boost Milani's damage. And going from the Favonius to the Peak Patrol Song is a reasonable roughly 10% gain for Milani. So personally, if you do plan to primarily use her for support and you don't want to go all the way up to Constellation 2, the weapon banner for the Peak Patrol Song is, in my opinion, the next step for investment for her. Although always remember the risk involved when it comes to the weapon banner. First of all, if you're starting from scratch, you only have a 37.5% chance of getting the weapon that you actually want. The one fate point where if you don't get the weapon that you want, does not cross over into the next banner. So that means you pretty much need to guarantee 2 hard pities, which means a total of 140 pulls to essentially guarantee you the weapon that you want. Otherwise, you could end up getting something like the Skyward Spine and literally just be out, 70 pulls worth of resources, which is absolutely devastating. Now, continuing on Xilonen's investment priority, personally, Constellation 2 is absolutely incredible for her. Basically, it should increase the damage of your main DPS characters somewhere between 5 to 20%, really depends on the character, the build, etc, etc. And for Electro, I still haven't personally tested it much, but I'm sure many people have cooked up some really interesting things for Electro. Now, if you do want to keep going, well, Constellation 3 increases resistance shred by 9%. Constellation 4 adds even more damage to normal attack, charge attack, and plunge attack damage from her teammates, which is absolutely incredible. And finally, at Constellation 6, Xilonen will end up doing more damage as well as providing some full party heals as well, making her actually interestingly a bit better with Furina as well. Now, the next character to talk about is Chiori, and poor Chiori, almost nobody owns her, and well, unfortunately it is for a somewhat good reason. Now, Chiori obviously isn't incredibly meta defining, but she is a solid sub DPS Geo character, all things considered. So when it comes to Chiori, as you know, when you use her elemental skill, she'll create 1 tomato doll, which basically does off-field Geo damage. And this is a bit of an issue because Chiori as a character, people really wanted to use her with Navia, and that makes, perfect sense. And this was one of my big issues with Fontanian constellations in general, was that they were very, well, how should we put it? Like, you would pretty much need a constellation with certain characters in order to use certain Fontaine characters with other Fontaine characters. And in this case for Chiori, if you have a Geo Construct and then you use her elemental skill, we can see now she creates 2 tomato dolls, which essentially doubles her off-field DPS, or pretty close to it. And that makes a huge difference for Chiori's viability. And I think that's a big reason why Chiori wasn't very popular, was because in order to actually use her properly with the teams that you wanted to use her on, you had to buy her Constellation 1 effectively, because with her Constellation 1, if there is another Geo character in the party, then both the tomato dolls will spawn. So honestly, a pretty unfortunate character design choice that they took with Chiori, which led to poor sales. And also, you should definitely keep that in mind if you are interested in pulling for Chiori, who you plan to use her with. And even without her Constellation 1 and without a Geo Construct and only with 1 doll here, she's already power creeping Albedo, and with 2 dolls out when she has a Geo Construct teammate, or she has Constellation 1 with a Geo teammate, she completely power creeps Albedo. Now, power creeping Albedo isn't the best thing to put on your resume, but she is still, regardless, she does decent damage while she's off field for an off field Geo damage character. Now, if we take a look at her investment priority, we can see that the Uralu Misagiri, her signature weapon, definitely provides a pretty big upgrade over the free-to-play option of the Flute of Ezpital. However, her Constellation 1 provides roughly a 51% damage gain with her Constellation 1 if you're using her with Navia. By Constellation 6, she's going to do a colossal amount of damage, and she's definitely one of the best DPS Geo characters by C6R5. Now, overall though, do I recommend Chiori? I mean, look, if you really like any character you can make, pretty much any character do reasonably well in this game, although some of the older characters like poor Chi-Chi here, really struggle to make that big of an impact in comparison. However, a character like Chiori, if you really want to make her work, she will do well. She is very powerful. She does a lot of damage. However, unfortunately, outside of just like being a sub DPS Geo character, she really doesn't do a whole lot in comparison to a character like Xilonen, who will just elevate most teams on your account by a lot. Now, I also want to talk a bit more about the weapon banner here. Now, for example, if you're pulling for the Peak Patrol song for Xilonen and you want to actually use Xilonen as a main DPS character, which she is viable as a main DPS character at Constellation 0, not incredibly powerful, but pretty viable, then this weapon banner is a pretty solid option because the Uraku Misagiri is her second best in slot option for a main DPS Xilonen. And obviously the Peak Patrol song is her best in slot. So if you are running main DPS Xilonen and you do get the Uraku Misagiri, it's not the end of the world because Xilonen can indeed make great use of it. Obviously Chiori's best in slot weapon is the Uraku. There's no need for me to even mention that. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to spend too much time talking about the 4 stars or the 4-star weapons because there's just way too much to yap about with just the 5-star characters, but I can say that the 4 stars on this banner aren't looking so great. Now, for the second half banners, we have both Nahida as well as Hu Tao. So let's start by talking about Nahida. Now, obviously, Nahida is one of the better / best characters in the game. And if we actually look at this old Abyss 12 data that I compiled, although I haven't updated it since version 4.7, sorry about that, guys, we see that Nahida's usage rate has been pretty high and maintained a pretty high usage rate even through most of Fontaine, although not, 4.8 and beyond, which I did not include. But we can start to see that her usage is indeed falling a bit in version 5.1. Now, does that mean all doom and gloom? No, because perhaps a bit of her usage is actually diluted by Kanish, because Kanish is a Dendro DPS character, which means that if you need Dendro damage, Nahida is not typically run with a character like Kanish. So that means that you're probably going to choose one or the other. And if you have both of them, well, that means that you're not using one or the other. So I do find that to be an interesting dynamic, is that Kanish will be sometimes chosen over Nahida, even on the same player's account. Now, with that being said, Nahida obviously is still a very powerful and very free-to-play friendly character, especially if you are a newer player. You can pretty much just have Nahida plus Kuki plus Xingqiu, and they will carry you pretty hard, especially for a low budget second team. So we can take a look at Nahida's constellations, and let me just fix that one really quick. And this definitely focuses more on her personal damage, which she definitely deals non-negligible damage, especially once you have her properly built. However, with that in mind, Nahida is definitely an enabler for a lot of teams, more so than the main source of damage. And her big constellation is definitely her Constellation 2, which provides negative 30 defense once Quicken is triggered, as well as 20% chance for Bloom to crit. And for a lot of teams, this typically equates to 10 to 20-ish% more overall team damage for most Dendro teams, which is a very solid Constellation 2. So yeah, if you do want to really get the most out of your Nahida and you've been investing kind of vertically into her, well, Constellation 2 is a good place to stop. For today's day and age, her Constellation 6 is not nearly what it used to be, although it's still good for sure, but it's not what, modern day Constellation 6s are in comparison. I think Nahida still has a very high pull value. It's hard to go wrong with pulling her, but for me personally, given the timeline that we have the banners coming, and this completely depends on the amount of Primo Gems, whether you spend money in the game or not. But this is an important topic, is that since we are in midway through version 5.1 with about 10 days, 19 hours remaining, this means that version 5.2 will obviously come next. And notably, version 5.2, actually, the drip marketing for it revealed that we have Chaska as well as Auroran as the upcoming new characters. And what's super notable about that is that the Pyro Archon Mavuika is missing. So that means, let's say you ended up pulling for Xilonen, you actually have at least 1.5 patches to save up Primo Gems in order to potentially pull for the Pyro Archon that at earliest would come at version 5.3. If I had to guess, I would guess that she comes in the first half of version 5.3. Although, you know, obviously it could be any time, it could be second half, it could be 5.4, or hell, maybe they won't even release her. But I highly doubt that, considering, you know, obviously Hoyoverse does like money. And yeah, I mean, personally, when it comes to participating in Genshin Impact's combat as well as the meta, typically the region's Archon is going to be the most impactful as well as the most interesting, kind of defining an entire region's playstyle. Me personally, I would pull for Xilonen, and then I would go for Mavuika in version 5. Whatever it might be. Now, the last character to talk about is Hu Tao. Hu Tao is an ancient character, very fitting of her career, sending off ancient souls to the afterlife. And unfortunately, when it comes to Hu Tao, her constellations are ancient as well, and even her constellation 6 is not as good by today's standards, because unfortunately it has horrific quality of life, needing to wait 60 entire seconds for it to re-trigger again. And it's actually been a while since I've used her in Abyss 12, but I actually think they fixed this issue in Abyss 12. But for general usage, this one time per 60 seconds is absolutely atrocious. This means that you either have to build her for Constellation 6 or you have to build her for Constellation 5 playstyle, which means that you have as little crit rate as possible with as much crit damage, HP percent, potentially elemental mastery as possible. And that means that she's completely useless outside of her Constellation 6 being active, which activating it as well is just not a smooth experience, because you have to use her elemental skill like 4 or 5 times off the top of my head. I don't remember how many times you have to use it, but you have to use it many times in order to activate Constellation 6, which is, you know, terrible quality of life by today's standards. Now, Hu Tao's Constellation 1 still reasonable, lets you go from roughly 9 to 10 average charge attacks to maybe 11, I believe, off the top of my head, charge attacks, but it's a pretty tame Constellation 1 for DPS characters. Nowadays, you know, modern DPS character Constellation 1s are typically absolutely bonkers. Like, just compare this. This gets Kanish 100% crit damage on his scale spiker cannons, compared to literally just, you know, 1 extra charge attack and a bit better stamina management for Hu Tao, which is, you know, just completely modern constellations are completely power crap. Now, if you just really like Hu Tao as a character, you know, she's still a perfectly usable character in today's meta. Although obviously characters like Arlecchino tend to be more preferred, because Arlecchino is generally a smoother experience to use in terms of the playstyle as well as kind of the modern style of gameplay in comparison to Hu Tao's kit, which is a bit old school. But still, she still does reasonable damage, and if you just like her, you find her fun, and who knows, maybe the Pyro Archon will help her out a little bit, although that's a huge gamble in terms of whether or not the Pyro Archon will help Hu Tao or not. So yeah, overall, okay pull value if you just like Hu Tao. Alright, after quite a bit of digging, I did manage to find my old Hu Tao calculations, and in this case we can see that her Constellation 1 is definitely a noticeable improvement, going from, you know, this much damage to about this much damage, which is roughly an 18.78% increase to her overall damage output. This is because she's able to output, I believe, 1 or 2 extra charge attacks in many situations, because now the charge attacks no longer cost stamina. It is definitely a great quality of life for Hu Tao, although I gotta be completely honest, in my opinion, it is not like 100% absolutely necessary for her in comparison to, like, you know, kind of what people were saying back in the day. And the next upgrade to consider, in my opinion, especially if you have the R5 Dragon's Bane, is then the Staff of Homa after that, which provides a 15.79% increase to her overall damage output in comparison to, for example, Constellation 1, which not only increases her overall damage per rotation by a bit more, it also provides a lot of quality of life, because, well, you know, you actually have stamina when you play with this character. Finally, Constellations 2 through 5 basically literally do almost nothing, especially for the level of investment. Yes, they do a little bit of stuff, like a little bit more for Constellation 3, blah blah blah, you can see here. However, in the end, it leads to very little actual damage gained. And Constellation 6, if you actually build her with a Constellation 6 build, well, she's going to do, you know, noticeable amount more damage. But yeah, I mean, at this point, you know, you've reached super whale territory, and her Constellation 6, as mentioned, is a bit awkward to use. Now, in terms of the weapons, that is definitely not Nahida's weapon. We have the 1,000 Floating Dreams as well as the Staff of Homa, presumably. I'm assuming they showed us this, but if not, well, they're the signature weapons of Nahida and Hu Tao, and I'm going to assume that they're going to be the 5.1 second half banner featured weapons. Staff of Homa nowadays is honestly only the best in slot weapon, notably for Hu Tao. I mean, you know what's crazy is that it used to be the best in slot weapon, and it probably still is the best in slot DPS weapon for Zhongli, where Zhongli's damage actually would matter a bit in speedruns for way back in the day, but nowadays Zhongli's damage is just a complete meme. Like, you know, you just don't care how much damage Zhongli does. Like, who cares if Meteor does 50,000 damage or like, you know, 70,000 damage? No one cares in today's meta about Zhongli's damage, but back in the day, it actually used to matter for it to be Zhongli's best in slot weapon, because you know, that extra bit of chip damage would often be the difference in one-shotting the wave or not. Staff of Homeless, you know, it is an above average stat stick, oftentimes roughly second, third, or, you know, depending on if the character is an elemental mastery scaling character or not, you know, a bit worse. Best in slot polearm for many DPS characters, although it is kind of falling behind in terms of new polearm DPS characters being released, having typically, you know, way better signature weapons catered to their kits in comparison to the Staff of Homa, how it used to be a bit more universal, a bit better on so many other characters. Now, in terms of the 1,000 Floating Dreams, this one's a bit more interesting because you can literally slap it onto any Catalyst character and it will just provide the entire team 40 Elemental Mastery. And obviously it's good for Nahida. It's really good for Nahida's personal damage output, especially in comparison to the Sacrificial Fragments. However, in terms of the other Catalyst characters that can kind of make use of it, Baizu can provide 40 Elemental Mastery to, you know, some of his teams, which is okay, I guess. Constellation 2 Klee is actually one of the biggest benefactors of the 1,000 Floating Dreams, able to provide 40 Elemental Mastery to Milani teams, especially if you just want to go for those huge vape numbers. That 40 elemental mastery can definitely help out. Now, honestly though, it's really that 40 elemental mastery buff is not worth the Primogem value unless you are a min-maxing sweaty speedrunner like I used to be, although these days I haven't been speedrunning as much. But yeah, so personally, 1,000 Floating Dreams is an okay investment choice for Nahida's personal damage. And still though, I personally would value Constellation 2 on Nahida before the 1,000 Floating Dreams, because that increases the team damage by a lot more than, for example, the 1,000 Floating Dreams does. All right, so that wraps up my 5.1 banner summary and advice. Let me know if you found this video helpful, if you want to see more banner summaries in future patches, as well as banner advice. Maybe we can make this kind of more of a regular thing. But Xilonen, absolute goat of a character, incredible character, insane character. Highly recommend her if you haven't pulled for her. And as for the other characters, they are okay, with Nahida being also an exceptional character. Although, you know, the meta is moving a bit away from Hyperbloom spam, although Alhaitham, Nahida is still going to be a team that is likely going to be able to 9-star Abyss 12 until the dawn of time. Let me know if you're just saving, if you're skipping everyone, or if you pull for one of these characters and why, down in the comments below. And don't forget to check out today's sponsor, Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade, as they make these types of videos possible. Huge thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.